The Pacific Theater of War is known for some of the most important major battles during World War II. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. The Doolittle Raid on Japan in 1942. The Battle of Midway in 1942. The Battle of the Coral Sea in 1942. The Battle of Guadalcanal in 1943. The Battle of Saipan in 1944. The Battle of Iwo Jima in 1945. And the Battle of Okinawa in 1945. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had done devastating damage to the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Almost all the battleships were either damaged or out of action. Battleships were the command ships of any naval strike force, meaning the capabilities of the U.S. Pacific Fleet were severely crippled after Pearl Harbor. However, the U.S. defeat at Pearl Harbor did have a silver lining. The Japanese forces had missed the U.S. carriers and submarine fleet. The U.S. would have to defend the Pacific with aircraft and submarines until the Pacific battleship fleet could be repaired and put back into action. In addition, the type of warfare would have to be very different from Europe. Japan's empire stretched over a vast area of Pacific islands, so victory would require a strategy called island hopping. Island hopping was a strategy where the United States Navy would heavily bombard islands, followed by a landing of U.S. Marines. Once the Marines had rooted out the Japanese defenses and captured the island from the ground, U.S. forces would then move on to another island closer to Japan, using each island as a stepping stone, until they could eventually stage an all-out invasion of Japan and bring an end to the war. In addition, the United States would need the help of their Australian allies in the South Pacific in order to pull off a victory against the Japanese Empire.
As America turned its sights on the Pacific, it saw some early victories. The first such victory was the Doolittle Raid. 4 months after Pearl Harbor, 16 U.S. planes pull off a daring bombing raid on Tokyo. Since Japan was so far away, the United States needed to take a new strategy in order to get their bombers near the Japanese mainland. They placed their heavy bombers on the aircraft carriers in order to get close enough to reach Japan. They were able to hit major wartime targets in Tokyo. It lifted U.S. spirits and shocked Japan into the realization that the U.S. could fight back and win. The next battle is the Battle of the Coral Sea. U.S. and Australian forces defeated the Japanese invading force in an all-air battle. This was the first major all-air battle in the Pacific. An Allied victory turned back the Japanese invasion of Australia and kept an important ally safe. Next is the Battle of Guadalcanal. This was the first action seen by U.S. Marines in World War II. Japan held the island of Guadalcanal, which had a vital airfield on it. From this airfield, the Japanese Air Force could reach and bomb Australia. By taking that island, we now remove the threat that Japan had placed on Australia.
Perhaps no other battle in the Pacific Theater was as important as the Battle of Midway in 1942. In June of 1942, U.S. forces were patrolling the Pacific in search of the Japanese carrier fleet, with the help of the Navajo Code Talkers, that were a group of Navajo tribesmen employed by the Marines to use their ancient Navajo language to confuse the Japanese with code. The United States task forces decoded Japanese messages and pinpointed the exact location of the Japanese carriers. U.S. forces launched a surprise attack on the Japanese carrier fleet. Caught completely off guard, the Japanese carriers and their surrounding task forces were easy targets for U.S. torpedo planes and bombers. By the battle's end, the Japanese had lost 4 carriers, 1 destroyer, and 250 planes total. The Allied victory at Midway is a turning point in the war in the Pacific. The Japanese Navy had lost all 4 aircraft carriers that fought in the battle, and their aircraft carrier fleet was crippled. This allowed the United States to gain air dominance in the war in the Pacific, which allowed them to begin the strategy of island hopping, with air supremacy overhead. If the United States had actually lost Midway, it's quite possible the Japanese would have gained both air supremacy and naval supremacy in the Pacific, putting the United States at a severe disadvantage and a position where they possibly could lose the war. After their significant naval victory at Midway, the United States forces in the Pacific began a major offensive against Japan. The push involved neutralizing or eliminating the threat of the rest of the destroyers and battleships in the Japanese Navy. In desperation, as American forces got closer to Japan, Japan implemented kamikaze attacks. Kamikazes were suicide pilots who, once dropping their payload on U.S. targets, would intentionally crash their planes into U.S. ships in order to inflict damage, even at the cost of their own lives. For Japanese soldiers, conducting a kamikaze attack was a great honor. To die in service of the emperor was seen as one of the greatest sacrifices you could make, but even the kamikazes couldn't stop the U.S. advance towards Japan.
The next battle is the Battle of Iwo Jima. In February of 1945, Marines land on the most fortified island on Earth, Iwo Jima. Over 20,000 Japanese were entrenched in defenses. Before the Marines landed, the US Navy conducted a heavy naval bombardment of the island. This did little to soften the defenses, and the landing waves took heavy losses. 6,000 Marines died taking the island, but the Japanese suffered much larger losses. Of the 20,000 Japanese that originated on the island, only 200 survived. The Japanese knew that they were going to suffer huge losses and could not win the battle. Japanese officials told their soldiers to try to kill 10 Americans before they died. The victory was immortalized by the image of Marines raising the flag on Mount Suribachi. General Douglas MacArthur retook the Philippines in 1944. Combined with the victory at Iwo Jima, the United States could now plan an invasion of the last island stronghold outside of Japan.
With Iwo Jima taken, the United States forces were knocking on the doorstep of Japan. There was only one island stronghold left to assault, and that leads to the Battle of Okinawa. In April 1945, the United States forces assault the island of Okinawa, only 350 miles off the coast of Japan. About 2,000 kamikaze pilots killed 5,000 US sailors and sunk 30 American ships. Marines on the island of Okinawa faced even tougher resistance than they did on the island of Iwo Jima, because tunnels and caves had been dug into the hillsides, filled with hundreds of thousands of Japanese soldiers ready to fight until the end. This helps lead Okinawa to become the bloodiest battle for US forces in the Pacific theater. More American men lost their lives at Okinawa than any other Pacific battle in World War II. By June 1945, 3 months after the assault began, the United States controlled the island, but at an enormous cost. The US lost over 7,000 men, more men than they had lost at Iwo Jima. Japan lost 110,000 soldiers, including ritualistic suicides. After fighting until the end, Japanese soldiers who knew that they were defeated and possibly could be captured would commit suicide instead of being captured by US forces. Death, even by suicide in defense of the emperor, was seen as honorable. One of the most common ways to kill themselves was to pull the pin of a grenade and hug it tight to your chest until it exploded. This shows the extent to which the Japanese would go to defend their empire, and the tough defense that US Marines faced in the Pacific. Overcoming the severe damage caused to the United States Pacific Fleet at the attack at Pearl Harbor, the United States has successfully employed the strategy of island hopping to draw its forces closer to the island of Japan. By 1945, United States forces had taken nearly every island stronghold held by Japan. The time had come to prepare for the invasion of the island of Japan. But with the real possibility of massive casualties, estimated to be 1 million American soldiers, the United States would consider another means by which to end the war, one that was so secret and so destructive, it would change the world forever.